had forgotten that I had not completed chapter. There's very little in chapter one. It's about homeostasis and stuff that you had, I'm sure, positive and negative feedback. So let me just briefly go into that before I finish that chapter four, and hopefully we can start skin in earnest on Wednesday and virtually on Friday. Sorry, see, I don't want that to count against my number of unexplained virtual classes. We have there's a limit to not that. What's he going to do?
We won't tell you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't tell anybody. I have to tell people. See, when you're in the look, you guys, you're not kids. When you're in the workplace, nobody likes surprises. So, I mean, if somebody comes looking for me and I don't tell Dr. Badger that I can't be here for whatever reason, then it's a problem. So I just word to the wise is usually sufficient. You know, feel like if you were no call, no show, not good. Moving on, homeostasis. That is the internal. I alluded to that. If you remember on Monday, all these different things. We know we need food and oxygen and certainly water and maintaining the appropriate internal. But really, the whole idea, the beauty of the human body, everybody, is that we are inherently a wonderfully homeostatic organism. We keep things intact inside. And remember, you might recall me saying that really the way we are able to get a quick snapshot of that is what vital signs are about. They really deal with abnormalities within those systems. And that's the beauty of it. So we know if there's an unexplained reason why your pressure's up or your temperature or your pulse, all of those kinds of things. I mean, it's different if you just got done with a workout. You might expect, some significant changes. Bless you. So this is all about homeostasis. I love the term dynamic equilibrium, and everything contributes to it. For those of you, and it's not just going to a medical field, because everybody's going to have folks as they get older, relatives and friends. And what happens is when one system isn't working well, it puts a burden on the other system. And eventually, one of the things that a lot of people succumb to over time is called multi-system failure. Sometimes they're directly tied into and other times indirectly. But that is part of the difficulty, okay? The more systems that you have potentially that are malfunctioning can really alter this. And so everything, and it's constantly monitored. We make rapid adjustments with the nervous system. We make slower adjustments, not slow. Nervous system, fractions of a second. Endocrine, seconds, minutes, hours, days. And all these different things that happen. I mean, so I just went over to, as I want to do, over to Dr. Badger's office, and he had Hershey bars with chocolate. Food moment. I have a lot of those. That raised my blood sugar. Okay, so immediately my body started pouring out insulin. For instance, we'll learn about when we talk about diabetes in the physiology part of the program, that if there's an over output of insulin, a lot of times that's a signal that there's going to be irregularities in insulin utilization in the future. And so your body can compensate by putting out glucagon to try to elevate it. Typically, they're in a dynamic balance. So your sugar should go up when you just had a candy bar, but it shouldn't go down so precipitously to cause you some kind of distress, something we call reactive hypoglycemia, which is a warning sign. Some people, I happen to get it because I've had stomach surgery on 2 occasions, and unfortunately, people like that are prone to it. So there's lots of different things that are there, and all of these, and basically it's very straightforward. Your body appreciates a change, is interpreted and reacted to by some type of control center, and the change is handled by an effector. And they give you the usual ones that are there. So we're constantly monitoring stimuli that are there. In this room in the summer, this room is ridiculously hot. Now it's, to me, relatively comfortable. Obviously, where air is coming out. Okay? So the control center is just like anything else. It's a default. It's a preset. Okay. Can you alter those presets? Yeah, over time, diet, exercise, lifestyle changes. You can effectively make yourself, and if anything, I'm still living proof that has happened over time, being able to change someone who had a very self-destructive lifestyle with smoking. I never drank, but smoking and stress and taking a lot of pills and being addicted to painkillers. it's a statute of limitations passed. Don't make me start. Because we had access. That was one of the things in medicine that we used to get samples. Well, I like the samples. They gave you controlled substances for samples. Good samples. So, I mean, all of those kinds of things, but you can recover from them if you do so in time before there's some significant degree of damage. I mean, now I don't take any pills other than ones for arthritis, high blood pressure. So, set points, inputs, outputs. So, outputs are different, and typically they fall into two categories, with the extraordinarily vast majority negative feedback. There's a zillion examples. The blood sugar one is one. You eat something with a lot of sugar, you produce insulin. The insulin lowers the blood sugar. If it to sort of soften the blow, you also start to produce glucagon, and eventually you'll balance it out. So it gets back to whatever the set point is. That's why our fasting blood sugars are good indicators of how well sugar is maintained. A better test in the old days, and there's other tests now, was called a 2-hour postprandial. That meant you fasted overnight. You had a certain carbohydrate load and tested the sugar 2 hours later after that carbohydrate load. Yeah, and you can do things with things called glucose tolerance tests. Now we have hemoglobin A1Cs to monitor the glycosylated nature of your hemoglobin, which is that along with fasting blood sugar is a fairly reliable. And we can do blood sugars easy now. Finger sticks, you don't have to do venipuncture every time. Just for instance. And something we do in the physiology part of the lab for those who are interested. I'm very happy to have you stick yourselves. If you want. Don't feel obligated to be stuck. Because my daughter, she would faint with a needle. Honest to goodness. She was going in, she had to get some blood drawn, and we're telling the lab tech, you better put her in the chair and lay her back. She's going to faint as soon as she sees the needle. Oh, nobody ever faints. Boom. What happened? We told you. So if you're in the healthcare business, somebody tells you someone's going to have a specific reaction because they have it all the time. Here's a word of advice. Listen. Because if not, if you don't listen, you're an anal orifice. I didn't want to say asshole because that would be, oh, never mind. So most everything is negative feedback. That's there. Basically, what does it do? It starts immediately as you respond, it begins to alter and reverse the response back to normal, whatever the preset is. So whether it's temperature, whether it's sugar. So in temperature, we perspire. The perspiration evaporates, we cool down. When it's cold, Lord knows it's going to get cold. Okay, you shiver. Involuntarily, your muscles start to contract, your skeletal muscles, they generate heat. And your presets are resumed. And those are the typical examples. We'll see them with calcium. This textbook forever has used these little teeter-totter things. They look like seesaws. And I hate them. If you like them, look at them. I don't do them. So all of this. So receptors. Interestingly, the pancreas may be the control center. The receptors are probably in the hypothalamic area. That's where the blood-brain barrier is weakest. It sends the signal to the pancreas, and the pancreas releases the insulin, and the glucagon kind of goes in concert with that, as we'll get to when we do it. And there's that. I don't touch them. Don't like them. There. So I always say, for memorizational purposes, always remember exceptions. Because the default is negative feedback. How does calcium control? Negative feedback. Where are the exceptions? The two most common: blood clotting, positive feedback, delivering a baby vaginally by way of the birth canal using oxytocin, which is made genetically, into pitocin, a relatively short chain, polypeptide, non-amino acids. Okay, so those are examples. So effectively, the response is to amplify, like with blood clotting. You amplify the response. Once it starts to clot, it clots more and more until the clotting is completed. You start, rather than have the baby respond by going to the birth canal contracting and pushing backwards, it amplifies and pushes forward. And you'll see a couple more of these, like the onset of puberty, particularly in women, the onset of menstrual flow, those are, we see a lot in female repro, by the way, of positive feedback. And we don't get to the subtleties of that until really the end of our time together, which I'm always looking forward to. Nobody else, I wager, tells you they're looking forward to not seeing you again. Okay. So enhancement of labor contractions, oxytocin. So oxytocin is the endogenous form. We have a different name. The first substance that was made genetically, in case you're interested, was insulin. So it was called Humulin when it came out. It has a variety of names now. But for years, when I started, they were using pork-based insulin. And then almost when I was in school, we started to use bovine insulin. Because a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, plus reactions, didn't like the pork. And they were more inclined to use it so there were, folks who were, if they were Jewish or Islamic, they would not use pork products. And some people just didn't want to inject themselves. My grandfather was like that. So he succumbed, at 70 in 1955 was old. But he was diagnosed, he wouldn't do they have the insulin, they didn't have pills or anything. Just saying. So, and that was really the first. So we started, when I was in my residency, starting to use things like Humulin. And so here's the blood, we'll do the clotting cascade. So I wanted to just get this for you. So increases risk of disease. We see this associated with aging. Your ability to respond is much more limited than it used to be. Okay. So, it shouldn't surprise you. I'm sure, when someone who is younger and they're working out, and I'm always amazed at how rapidly their heart rate will return back to normal. Very, very good. It's a very wonderful sign of health. Where someone of my age, when I go to the gym and get on a treadmill, and I try to get up between 120 and 130 for X amount of time, it's up there for a while. So even after you stop the activity, your recovery period is considerably long. And there's tons and tons of ink. Yes, sir.
Have you tried like the?
Yeah. And it just is, it doesn't help when you're overweight. It doesn't help when you do it as consistently. For a while, it was much better. Before you probably even got here, right before the lockdown, my wife and I were doing keto and we did really well on that.
Okay.
So I try, and for whatever reason, it gets old. So you miss bread. We call it the Stein curse. Sir.
Hear about that cyclist? Like he has to get up in the middle of the night, cycle, otherwise he'll die because his resting heart rate is too slow.
Too slow. I can imagine. Yes.
You like what a pacemaker an option?
It probably not. I think the pacemaker would not, for somebody if they were in the case of that, but then that would really preclude them being a cyclist. But for most people, the pacemaker is reserved for inherently cardiac arrhythmias that would predispose them to go into AFib or VFib, where they have a tendency to do that. And we're going to do all those arrhythmias, by the way. It's years ago, they used to use medication for arrhythmias. The medications were very harsh. They stopped using them. And then, and then pacemaker technology has improved. But it's not the type of, I don't have a difficult, so if I stop working out, I feel it. I'll just take it easy for a while. And, after I've done with the treadmill, I'll do some abdominal work or some core work or things like that. And, I slowly enough at first, it isn't a problem. I've been fortunate that the cardiac aspect of things hasn't reared its ugly head. But and that's where hereditary things are. My dad died of heart disease at relatively young, not a whole lot older than I am. Okay, unfortunately, but I favor my mom's side of the family. We live long and have a lot of arthritis. Live long and prosper. Good. I was worried about you with Spaceballs. Now I'm feeling better. Would it shock you? It doesn't shock anybody that my eldest and I used to go to Star Trek conventions in costume.
In costume, you
in costume.
That's cool. You have to show us pictures.
I do not have pictures.
What?
What?
You're lying.
I am not lying. I am not lying. I got yelled at. My son, and look, I told you he's a captain of a destroyer. So he's achieved a lot for a young man, for a 4 year. And so when I went on this thing called a Tiger Cruise, where they take like friends and family, not significant others, but friends and family, for a couple of days. Everybody, we're sitting around in the wardroom, we're eating. He's not there, and they're asking me, "Did you always want to be, a captain of a ship and blah blah blah?" And I'm telling him about what we used to do. Was start because he was so enterprising. We'd go there, and he'd get a booth and sell memorabilia, action figures, his sister's Beanie Babies she didn't want anymore, comic books, all that type of stuff. So he was always very enterprising and very, he's an overachiever. Not terribly brilliant in the classroom. Go figure. No, you really don't. I mean, he's never set foot in a science classroom in his life, in a science laboratory. I think he took calculus 3 times. He's the captain of a guided missile destroyer. Just saying. Thank goodness he has a wonderful wife and 2 beautiful children. Moving on. So all of these are part of it. Negative feedbacks mechanisms become overwhelmed. And at that point, and this is what we begin to see. So imagine somebody who was stupid like I was and ended up with emphysema, which I didn't, because I stopped smoking for whatever miraculous reason. Your body is starved for oxygen. You can't get it into your system. Your heart senses that. The heart doesn't go, "I know you got emphysema, I'll take it easy on you." No, it's going to beat harder because it wants to push more blood into lungs that can't possibly accommodate it. It's just a vicious cycle. The heart works harder, needs more oxygen. The lungs still can't deliver. Boom. That's the way it works. That's my little spiel. Let's get back and finish this other chapter on connective tissues, which I am confident. And you guys asked questions. I'm so happy. I'll give Dr. Hilwig a good report. Not that she'll take it easy on you, but I'll give you a good report. Okay, now, so these were the tissues. So this is anywhere you have lining tissues, underneath it is loose areolar connective tissue. By far and away the most common of all of these that are there. And they call it universal packing material. And you might remember what I told you. This is an actual micrograph. You had micro. I'm not, for whatever reason in this class, I don't go crazy with microscopes. If you go on to graduate levels, particularly in medical fields, they will have practicals where they'll put up slides that you will have to identify. I'm not doing that. They used to do that when I taught at the community colleges like CCAC. And you have in first year students and they're putting on, it's ludicrous. I mean, we didn't do that till we were in medical school in our second year. I mean, it's crazy, but that's just me. So it's under here. It's under the lining. And this is how, and we're going to put this all together in the next chapter. We're going to start next week because of the air and the fact that things are not so densely packed. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, waste products have channels or passageways because it's underlying this, and everything that goes in epithelia is by diffusion. There's no direct blood supply. And you can see all of these in the micrograph itself. You can see the fibroblasts, the ground substance, the fibers, various different types. And with other ones, you'll be able to see, if you scan wider in the slide, you'll see a variety of white blood cells because they're there. That's part of your innate, what they call the cellular immune system, which is the second level of your immune system. Adipose tissue to me is the same thing. It's still loose, okay? And it's not just similar, it just has more storage. It's the natural place where we put storage. I have an abundance of it, unfortunately. Okay, they're called, not that funny, they're called adipocytes. So you don't see it's not that the matrix is less. You don't see it. The fat's obscuring it, I think. A lot of blood vessels, and that's one of the problems with extra weight. You're putting more of a burden on your heart. And yeah, shock, sometimes supposed to be in certain places. The distinction between brown fat and white fat, I think brown fat we see more in developmental. Only it's a big deal. And the interesting thing is you see the fatty cells and the nuclei are pushed. In the liver, the pressure tends to disrupt those cells. So when we see fatty deposits in the liver, it very often is on its way toward cirrhosis. Okay, and that can come from a variety of sources. By far and away, the most common is alcohol. By far. Someone tell my don't say it. Okay, and lastly, reticular. Reticular has those reticular fibers that are thinner, specially coated, and act like a strainer. Again, fine mesh strainer. They look like a reeler, but the fibers are thinner. The fibroblasts now have a different name because they're putting out those fibers, thin mounts of collagen, and they call it a mesh-like stroma. So you see it in lymph nodes. What do lymph nodes do? They filter a fluid that contains typically heavier, thicker products and infection. And so they're able to treat it. It's just like you get a swollen gland. That's a lymph node that has captured a virus particle or a bacterial particle and is in the process of responding to it, hopefully successfully. It could be worse because that's unfortunately an area where cancer cells travel. So you have to be wary of that. And we see that as a support, as you can see in the lymph nodes, in the spleen. Spleen plays a role in filtering out red blood cells for disposal, as well as being an immunological organ for surveillance. And as I sort of touched on before, the bone marrow is where we produce all of our blood cells, white cells, red cells, all the cell lines, including platelets. And particularly the platelets come as what's called a megakaryocyte. And it kind of goes through there, and it doesn't come out of cells as much as fragments. That's why you see in blood, we rarely use the term cell. We call them formed elements. The only true cell is the white blood cell because the red cells have shed their nucleus. They're immature. It's part of the maturation process. Very interesting. And unfortunately, I know entirely too much about anemia because I'm anemic. Got to go in probably tomorrow morning and get a blood test. Unhappy dance. So, and this is what you're seeing in here is not really, you see the fibers, but basically a slew of white blood cells because that's what it's doing. It's capturing materials that are there. So I don't ask students to, if I do it because I had to perforce at some of those community colleges, I made very easy slides. I don't do it here because I don't feel it's necessary. If you're going in that direction, you're going to get it. So Boy Scouts, be prepared. Not me. I don't go camping. My wife hates me. She loves it. The only time I went camping was with my best friend at the time, and he was an Eagle Scout. So he knew what he was doing. I felt I was safe. My idea of roughing it is going to a place that doesn't have room service or a hot tub in the room. Dense is just that. There's more fibers, and they're closely packed together. So loose implies that the cells are stretched apart and there's not an abundance of fibers. There's plenty of room for things to traverse through. Dense, tensile strength, tension and stretching, and it's all about the stretch. I can't do it here, but I'll show you if I remember in lab. Obviously not Monday, but a week from Monday. When we have these bundles that are strictly collagen, one, they appear distinctly white, at least and macroscopically white, that the waviness is because when they talk about parallel, it's not like we're in geometry, where we have two parallel lines and a transversal. You remember all those angles opposite each other and all that good stuff. Math major for a limited period of time. But here, parallel means they're all going in the same direction. And because the fibers tend to twist and turn, you'll see a waviness that's associated with them. It doesn't mean that they're not going in the same direction. So the fibroblasts make the fibers in the ground substance, but there's very little in the way of cells or ground substance. No room for blood supply. Tendons are all collagen. Ligaments have an elastic component, which is what makes them ligaments. They're a little more stretchy. You could, yeah, it's sort of like, you're like me and did a lot of work with materials over the years. You can actually induce stretch in things by cutting them on what's called a bias cut. Something we used to do a lot in taping and strapping for athletes. So I used to do a fair amount of that as well on things. But you'll see, and I'll try, maybe I can show that to you in the lab, because you can take something that doesn't stretch or something that does stretch and make it stretch more. But this is what a tendon would look like. Okay. If this is damaged, if there's no blood supply, it's not going to heal. It's going to heal with scar tissue. And no matter what anybody tells you, scar tissue diminishes function. For you and I, unless you're a very high output athlete, it really doesn't matter. If you or I tear a muscle, or even sufficient enough that it costs you a fair amount of time doing something you want to do, it's probably not going to impact you. At a very high level, those things take away from elite performers that are there. That's why, and we'll go over it again when we look at joints, why it is better to replace things, and that's why grafts are used for ACLs and PCLs or ulnar collateral ligaments, etc. That type of thing when you talk about Tommy John surgery. So dense, now, so they're regular. When it's regular, you can see a distinct pattern that's there. You don't see a lot of space, and you can see the parallel and somewhat twirled nature. But when you think about proteins from biochemistry, when you have structural proteins, frequently they're mostly made of spirals that have twisted. They're like braided, would be the best way to describe it. Where globular proteins have a mixture of pleated sheets and spirals and alpha spirals. Here, it's spirals, and effectively what happens is biologically we get things like this, and and effectively we create a spiral, and then we'll take something else and we'll spiral those together, and then those together. It's kind of what they are, and it gives them more tensile strength, form, and function. Love that. So we used to do that in surgery. If we were going to wire, like let's say we made a cut in the bone because we were repositioning it, and we'd close it with wire. And so what we would do is we take monofilament stainless steel suture, and then whoever was assisting me, I'd hold one end with the hemostat, they'd hold the other, and we just twist. And you braid the wire. Braided is much stronger, and monofilament's useful, okay, but braided is better. A long time ago. So irregular, where do you see this? Because it's inherently, because of the positioning, there's more stretch that's there. So the capsules, the very thick enclosures around your joints have this. That's another thing that tears and can be problematic. They enclose organs. It's under the skin. The skin, you'll see, is great because it's got interesting combination. It's got epidermis, it has loose areolar connective tissue, then it has dense irregular connective tissue. That's what makes up the deep dermis. That's the strength of your skin. So it's sheets, not so much bundles, tension in all directions, dermis, fibrous joint cluster. So around the kidney, around, for instance, would be a good idea around the liver to a lesser extent. So you can see the thickness of the fibers, but they're very irregularly shaped. But again, no room for blood vessels that are there. So you see the occasional fibroblast. The advantage here, at least, and so when we would cut into a capsule, and most of the surgery I did was bone and joint related surgery, is there's a pattern that you can see. Okay, and sometimes you'd use a sterile stylus. So it's like a pen filled with sterile methylene blue that you'd mark on it. So it's almost like you could see where you were going to put it together. So when you do that a lot surgically, you want to make sure that because if the edges are offset, you get a thing called a dog ear. And it's surgical parlance for irregular cut. If you sew, you'd be familiar with it. A lot of surgery, the sewing, we do a thing called subcuticular stitch. It's called a blind hem. My wife is an expert with a sewing machine. She made a very good business out of making, are you ready? goose clothes. And I always thought they just had feathers. You know what I'm talking about? With goose clothes? See, you learn something new every day, my mom said. Okay? These folks who are empty nesters, their kids and grandkids have left, they have plastic or like concrete or whatever, geese on their lawn, and they dress them like right now they have something for Labor Day. Then you'd have something for Halloween. Then you have something for Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's you'll on a goose.
Why a goose though?
I don't have an answer. There you see a lot of it, and you see these. We have it, and she's really good at that. Pardon me?
Oh my God,
Wait. Anna dear, I can't hear.
I'm so sorry. I got really excited about this goose sign.
I beg your pardon?
The goose that we're talking about, I was really excited about it.
I'm happy to hear that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I heard that you and your wife sell squishmallows.
We did. We do, but we did a lot more. We had, during the lockdown, we sold a lot, thousands of squishmallows.
What is it?
Thousands.
What's a squishmallow?
You don't know what a squishmallow is?
A marshmallow?
Goodness gracious. I have to educate you people. Here. Oh, I don't want to do that. You just go to Squishmallow.
Did you make them or did you buy them?
Oh, we buy them. This is a 16-inch. It's a plush toy. This is whatever convoy, spotted Highland cow. Highland cows don't look like that. And you can buy them, as you can see, for $25 wherever.
How much would you sell that one for?
Oh, probably 50 around Christmas, 50, 60 bucks.
Is that because they can't find them anywhere else? I see.
What?
Supply and demand.
But we can't. There's a whole. When you sell on Amazon, there's a whole lot of nuances. But my wife was an LPN, but for health reasons, it was hard for her to be there every day. And you'll hear more about that too as time goes on. We use ourselves. Now you got me. I got to finish this. I have 13 minutes. So this is the area like that. So understand. So I got on the tangent with sewing. That if you look at a joint in surgery, the fibers have a distinct pattern. So you want the fibers to line up when you cut through them tangentially. I didn't even bring a pen. So you have these lines, bang, bang, bang. If you cut through them, you want to line this and this up so it closes properly. There's all sorts of, these are all techniques that have been employed it's something I invented. It's been around forever, for sure. So elastic connective tissue is very significant. We have it in some areas, but it's not just ligaments or vertebrae because you have a fair amount of that. The single most important part is here. You're going to hear about elastic connective tissue, large arteries, the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, the pulmonary arteries, the carotid, the subclavian. Those arteries have an abundance of elastic connective tissue. It keeps them very intact and it provides, the elasticity creates a trampoline or rebound effect that is critical in maintaining proper blood flow. When we get to how the heart works, you will see that. Okay, and it's because even though we have a pulse, our blood flow is not pulsatile because pulsatile is turbulent and turbulence makes blood clot. So we go between 120/80, but comparatively gradually, as you will see. And it's all because of this. It also creates the force that closes the valves on the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. They're called the semilunar valves, and it creates the second heart cell. Just saying. So you can see that's all that darker stuff in there. That's all elastic fibers. So you can see great vessels. We call those the great vessels. Which brings us where we can easily do this in 10 minutes. Cartilage. So to me, we're making the transition from soft to loose and dense, but still soft and stretchy, to something that's not. And again, this is now the understand that our whole skeleton, with very few exceptions, forms from cartilage, particularly hyaline cartilage. There's a lot of water in it, and to a certain extent, there's a certain amount of give. It's not, some people consider it solid. I would say semi-solid. When you see cartilage that calcifies, or someone, when they start to get to my age, sometimes the cartilage in your rib, between your ribs and your sternum, begins to ossify. It starts to turn to bone. And that's why they have more trouble breathing. Barely. Yes, sir. In your ear? Yeah, that's elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage, you only have in two places: your ear and your epiglottis. That's the only thing. Hyaline cartilage, respiratory basis of bones, the ends of bones, because it's what's left of the cartilage that they nearly all form from. And then we have fibrocartilage, like the menisci in your knee, the intervertebral disc, which are a cartilage that, interesting, they have a nice soft gooey center, which is a remnant, for all you biology fans, of a notochord. Remember, we have pharyngeal pouches, a notochord, and it makes us vertebrates, and a dorsal hollow nerve cord. See, what a country! We're not echinoderms. I learned that we all had the same biology teacher: flat top haircut, white shirt, tie, the jars with all the things, 8 legs, 6 legs, 12 legs. Am I ringing a bell in your biology class? Same guy. Forever. They cloned that person.
Bill Nye.
Yeah. He's the most science guy. I mean, we're not talking about a PhD in the sciences. Sort of a useful self-promoter. Okay. Chondrocytes, and again, remember I told you about the lacunae. Effectively, to me, that's an optical illusion of something that does not stain. It appears like the cartilage are special. They have their own house. Oh, I got a house of my own. So collagen fibers, you're going to see that hyaline cartilage is nearly entirely collagen. And again, these proteoaminoglycans that attract water. Okay. Avascular. Everything comes from a sleeve around it that's relatively dense, called the perichondrium. When it becomes bone, it becomes a very important tissue that we'll get to in chapter 6, which is bone, called periosteum. Very significant. And so the pericondium is where all the cells come from. Hyaline, I don't know where. It has a bluish glass appearance. If you look at it in situ, which means like it's surgery, it's glistening and white. But when they stain it here, it's more blue. And long bones, again, where it was the nose, which is part of respiratory, is trachea, larynx, cartilage of the ribs. Elastic, again, ears and the epiglottis. Fibro it's denser and thicker, so it has some of the properties of both, and the intervertebral disc and the menisci of the knee and other joints. And the fact that those cartilage are there, the cartilaginous structure and discs are there, they enhance your motion. So it's a spacer or a gasket would be the way to describe it. That's here. And I like this. So here you can see hyaline cartilage. You can see the lacuna. See, to me, it's I can see the stain, and then I can't. And the analogy I always used to use was like painting yourself into a corner. And as the paint dried, now you were sort of stuck with this little thing around you. So as being produced, it firmed up, and there was some alteration right by the cell. And bones have the same thing, by the way. It's just a little less distinct when we come to bone. Okay, so again, the key word for this is avascular, no blood supply. Blood invades it, it hurts it, and eventually leads to the transition to bone. We'll see that. We start talking about nutrient arteries and diaphysis and epiphyses in bone, which are important terminology. Here's the elastic fibers that you can remember them from the artery. Seen that here before. And fibrocartilage, it's just, maybe it's just denser. Maybe it has some connective tissue elements. I don't know how else to describe it. Is collagen thicker? Who knows? Okay. Loses the ability to divide as we age, so it heals slowly. It's cartilaginous problems are difficult. When you hear about somebody having a meniscal tear and they go in and have an arthroscopy, very, very common. Most knee surgeries today are arthroscopic. And what you're doing is you're taking a torn area and you're grinding out the part where it's torn, smoothing it out, and it will fill in with scar cartilage, which you can do several times. The trouble is, the more often that if you do it, like I had a meniscal, a bucket handle tear of the meniscus when I was 35. And, the trouble is I just had one. Now, if you're like an athlete who's had, and some football players and people in sport will have it 5 or 6 times, they're going to need knee replacement down there. They're invading your start. Mark Schlereth would be the best example. He was a 3-time Super Bowl champ, first with Washington and then with Denver. And he had at least on each knee about 6 surgeries, which is a lot. So it can change. And so bone, the exact opposite. It starts as cartilage, but it makes this remarkable transition. The word osseous or osteo is all about bone, and it has a wonderful blood supply. It can, there's a certain amount of fat storage, but it's big at our support and protection, synthesis of all blood cells, white cells, red cells, and platelets, collagen compared to cartilage, and because of the arrangement of the collagen and the properties of the surrounding matrix, it attracts calcium salts, mostly calcium phosphate, some magnesium phosphate, and effectively it is a bank for calcium. And calcium is the big player, blood clotting, how nervous system work, how heart works. It is a major electrolyte. Calcium is super important. So we control the amount of calcium. And so when we have extra calcium, put it in bone. When we need more calcium, it comes out of bone. So it's a bank more than anything else. And the same thing, and it's the same cell line, whether it's fibroblast, chondroblast, or osteoblast. The osteocytes maintain it, so they're still productive. They're not prolific. And again, we'll see lacuna. The osteon we'll study in bone. That's the functional and structural unit of cortical bone, the hard outer shell of bone. Okay, cancellous or spongy bone is a bit different. So for instance, if you have like a patella, is considered a short bone. It's got a tiny amount of cortical bone. It's nearly all cancellous. Let's see. Bones in your wrist, bones in your ankle. So it's good news, bad news with regard to them. They are problematic in healing because there's not a lot of structure to set. It's tough. I mean, when we would have elderly people would damage their wrist, that was a difficult heal zone. Despite the best, and so that's what they look like. These are little lacunae here. This is not a lacuna. That's called the central canal. That is the main blood supply, nerve supply going in. Bone, surprisingly, is insensate. When you break a bone, the pain comes from the lining, as you will see on the outside. That's much more. So we're very, very careful when you operate on bone to cut through it. And I have and just like I was trying to show you with the capsule, putting it back together appropriately. So we incise it, we reflect it. In other words, bring it aside, and we sew it back together. If you're going to do it, take the time to do it right. You should. Okay, and blood, atypical because it's liquid. We do a whole unit on blood. Red blood cells, 1,000 times more common than white cells. The fibers, by definition, are soluble. That's the fibrinogen, and obviously the stuff that it does and voila. We do a whole unit on that. And that concludes our first week together. And I can't tell you how much fun it's been for me. I don't know about for you, but for me, it's been fun.